this project, you're going to learn about different parts of the human skeleton. We're going to bring that over into Vector. You're also going to learn about how the laser cutter works and which colors, which size, which width of some of these lines need to be in order for the laser cutter to recognize if it needs to outline it, if it needs to raster it, or if it needs to cut it out of the material that we're going to use. So let's go to get started. So the first thing you need to do is you need to go over to Teams, find the reference that I gave you, click on the three dots next to it, then download. Let's go over to vector.com, vectr.com. I'm going to go over to where it says new artwork, click on web. Let's go over to where it says full website. Let's give this a name, skeleton, and then create. Let's go over to where it says pages. We're going to change this from pixels to points. Let's go ahead and close that. Let's go over to the cloud on the bottom left hand side where it says upload image. Make sure you're inside your downloads folder. You might have to scroll up and down over here on the left hand side to where it says downloads. Click on the image and then open. I'm going to zoom in, so you can zoom in by holding down Control+. And the only thing that you're going to outline here is going to be the red parts. I'll fill in the blue parts for you. The red parts are going to be the part of the material that gets cut out. And then all you have to do is label these parts of this skeleton. So while our opacity is at 100%, we can click over here on layers, double click to rename this as image, lock it, and then go over to our pen tool and start outlining some of these different parts of the skeleton. So some of these simple closed shapes like the eyeballs and the nose are going to be a little bit simpler. Some of the skeleton parts are going to be a little bit more challenging just because they're a lot bigger and it needs to be a closed shape. So we could go over to pen tool. Let's start with something like an eyeball. So I'm going to click and space out my pen, click and drag, move a little bit, click and drag to create a curve, click and drag to create a curve, click and drag to create a curve, click and drag to create a curve. Keep moving around the eyeball here, and then next thing we need to do is we need to change the color of this from black to red so that the laser cutter knows that it needs to cut out this eye socket from the skeleton. So there's our circle there. You could always go back and adjust these different points by moving these different handles here. So the handles are these little circles. So I could zoom in here to show you by adjusting them. You could change the curve. You can also click and drag on these different points. Click on it again, move the anchor to round it out a bit. All right, so we need to go over to our border, click on the black circle, go to hex, go to RGB, and we need to change this first 0 to 255. So there's our red. We want to change this point size to 0.1. Once you're actually using the laser cutter, it should be set to 0.01, but that's too light, right? 0.01 is what the laser cutter recognizes as something that it needs to cut out. But for this tutorial, we're going to leave it at 0.1 so that we're still able to see it. You can also change all of these at the end by selecting them all and then changing it from 1 to 0.1. So it does not need to be filled in, so we can leave that fills check mark off and we can move on to the next thing. So let's try something that's a little bit more challenging. Let's try doing the outline of the skull here, and we might have to break the skull into different parts just because it might be a little bit more challenging to go around the whole part of the vertebrae and the skull at the same time. So let's go to pen tool and I'm going to zoom in. So I'm going to click and drag. Once you're a little bit more comfortable, you could do something like this. You could click and drag, but it also changes this curve here that's being created by this anchor point. So you want to break it up into smaller parts here. So click and drag, and it's already the red that we chose from the last layer. Click and drag. I probably want to go ahead and zoom in, and I want to stop just before that corner because that corner needs to be a sharp edge. Now click just in the corner and I'm going to click out. And then it needs to start curving again. So I'm going to go over to where this bar is. I'm going to drag down. And if you make a mistake, you could always hit the delete button or the backspace button on your keyboard. I'm going to start curving here. And I'm not just going to click inside that corner. There's a little curve here. Click And then right before I get to this curve, I'm going to click again, click and drag to round it out. Go over to this bar, I'm going to zoom down. Go to the bar, zoom down. Maybe make a mistake, backspace. And maybe I want to hit backspace again. I probably want to break that curve into smaller parts because some of these anchors are getting in the way. I'm going to slide this screen over, move over to the right. Once you get into some of these other areas, like the top of the skull that have a wide curve part, you can start spacing out some of these points here. Some of those more detailed parts, you have to put these points a little bit closer, just because these anchors start to get in the way of your design. So I can click on drag on some of these wider parts. Once I go back into some of those more detailed parts, I have to start putting these points a little bit closer together. Then we're going to go back to where we started. So there's the outline of the skull there. We have the eyeball there. And some of these parts are symmetrical, so you could always grab an eyeball. You could do Control C, Control V. And so this is still the right eyeball. And if you have these options here to flip horizontally or flip vertically. So if I flip that, I can use that for the left eyeball. So if you find different parts of this design that you can do that, go ahead and feel free to do that. This last thing here, let's pretend that we outlined this whole skeleton, is that we need to apply these labels here, right? So I want you to learn about these different parts of the skeleton. So I'm going to click on the T, click on the screen to apply the text tool, and then go ahead and copy these different parts of the skeleton. I'm going to go over to the text options, change it from Open Sans to Economica, and then we want to go from regular to bold. And we could click off the text tool, click back on it, grab a corner, and then you just want to place it as close as you can to your original labels. So fill out all these different parts here. Again, you really only have to do half of this. You could grab this bone here after you already made it and duplicate, flip it for this right side over here. Next thing that we would need to do after we're done outlining everything that needs to be cut out is you would have to select your layers. Make sure that they are 0.1 or 0.01 if we're actually using the software that we're going to use to set it over to the laser cutter. But for the purpose of this tutorial, let's leave it at 0.1 so it's actually visible on the screen. And then we're going to export, leave it as an SVG, click on download. It's going to send it over to your downloads folder, and that would be the file that you attach to Teams for me to laser cut for you. So if you have any questions of how to use the pen tool, how to bring the original image inside of Vector, which size or width or color some of these outlines need to be, go ahead and let me know.
Thank you for watching the video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. And feel free to watch any of the other related videos.